Chief Executive Carrie Lam announces details of the relaxation of social distancing measures. John Lee is the only one running in the CE election as registration closes today. And a man robbed a bank of $14,000 on Nathan Road. Good evening and welcome to TVB News. Details have been announced about the phased-in relaxation of social distancing measures set to take effect April 21st.
Restaurants can stay open longer and gyms will reopen. However, bars, beaches and swimming pools will remain closed for now. Christy Khan reports.
The government today announced long-awaited details about the phased easing of the city's social distancing measures, which is set to take effect from next Thursday. In the first phase, various premises including gyms, cinemas, beauty massage parlors, religious venues will reopen. But bars and nightclubs will remain closed. Eateries will be allowed to extend dine-in services until 10 p.m. with a maximum of 4 people per table. But restaurant staff will have to take rapid tests every 3 days. For banquets, no more than 20 people will be allowed to attend. Sports and cultural venues such as public libraries, museums, sports grounds, tennis and basketball courts will reopen as well. The maximum capacity of sports grounds will be 50% of the venue. People are required to wear face masks at the premises. Public beaches, pools, and barbecue sites, however, will stay shut. Cinemas will reopen, but if they want to serve food and drinks, then all customers and cinema staff need to have received free COVID jabs, although those who have recovered from the coronavirus are only required to have received 2 jabs. The authorities also said they will submit proposals to the Executive Council to ease the gathering rule. According to the plan, a maximum of 4 people will be allowed to gather in public places. A ban on multi-household gatherings in private places will be scrapped as well. Local tours will resume with a maximum of 30 people per tour. All staff are required to receive free COVID shots and conduct rapid tests before every tour. Tourists will have to fulfill the vaccine pass requirements, receiving 2 COVID jabs. The number per local tour can go up to 100 if all participants test negative for rapid tests on the same day. Meanwhile, Chief Executive Carrie Lam admitted that relaxing social distancing measures will pose risk concerning COVID infections. But she said the city right now is much more prepared to handle the next wave, having more isolation and treatment facilities. Also, with a downward trend in COVID infections, it is not possible to keep making businesses close their doors.
It is not a matter of contradiction. It is a question of meeting the aspirations of Hong Kong people and a large number of business premises which have not had a chance to do business for a very long period of time. It is not simply just a public health issue. We have to take account of the social and economic needs.
Some residents said they welcome the eased measures. This woman said she wishes to have a gathering with her family after the strict measures are lifted. But the catering business may not welcome the upcoming arrangements. Chairman of the Institute of Dining Arts, Ray Chiu, said the rapid test measure for catering staff will increase the financial burden on restaurant owners and staff. Christy Khan, TVB News.
The city reported another 1,043 COVID infections today. The number of confirmed positive cases was below 1,500 for 4 consecutive days. 579 cases were confirmed by PCR tests, with 464 cases detected by rapid antigen tests. All but 23 are locally acquired infections. The Center for Health Protection reported an imported case carrying the Omicron BA.5 strain. The male patient who flew in from South Africa via Thailand tested positive for the virus last Friday at a quarantine hotel. He was later transferred to an isolation hotel. Authorities said he had developed fever and a cough but became asymptomatic. Meanwhile, 33 more patients died in public hospitals yesterday. Well, the central government has decided not to appoint a new or acting chief secretary for administration.
Carrie Lam thinks the decision will not affect the administration's operations.
John Lee's resignation as Chief Secretary for Administration was approved last Thursday, but there was no word on who will take over the post. Chief Executive Carrie Lam said she was informed by Beijing today that it will not appoint another Chief Secretary, nor will there be an acting arrangement, as the current term of government will end in less than 3 months. That means the post will be vacant until June 30th.
係一個好少見嘅情況嚟嘅。
It is a rare situation indeed, but having consulted the CPG's views, it would be an appropriate arrangement to have not to have any acting arrangement, which I don't have an objection. Now, I've been CS for 4.5 years. I'm sure that we should be able to cope.
In the previous CE election, the administration at the time had acting arrangements immediately for the then Chief Secretary Carrie Lam and the then Financial Secretary John Tsang, who had resigned. Today, John Lee gave his views on the decision.
I think the appointment or otherwise of the Chief Secretary is a decision made by the central peoples of government together with the current government. And I'm sure that through arrangements made by the current government, the effective discharge of functions by the government will be maintained. So I do not think there will be major issues regarding this.
Meanwhile, Carrie Lam has appointed new members of the Candidate Eligibility Review Committee. Financial Secretary Paul Chan will take over as chairperson of the committee. That position was vacated after John Lee's resignation. Secretary for Education Kevin Yeung will replace former Home Affairs Secretary Casper Choi, who also resigned, as an official member of the committee.
It's the last day of the election nomination period for the chief executive race. Former Chief Secretary of Administration John Lee will be the sole candidate.
And as Lee continues to lobby for support from the election committee members, he says politics from overseas has gotten in the way of the local courts. He's vowing to ensure Hong Kong's rule of law. Jackie Lin reports.
This is the fourth open seminar Chief Executive hopeful John Lee attended online with election committee members. This time he met with those from the legal and accounting sectors who expressed worries about criticism of Hong Kong's legal system from overseas. They say it's important to decolonialize the legal system thoroughly, or Hong Kong judicial independence couldn't be ensured. This after 2 non-permanent British judges resigned from the Court of Final Appeal, saying they do not wish to appear to be endorsing an administration which had departed from values of political freedom and freedom of expression. John Lee said politics should not get into the administration of justice.
There is a trend that some countries try to pursue their political aims and somehow put pressure on people who have an important role in the administration of justice. Justice should be for justice' sake, and any other interference is against the rule of law.
Today, Lee also made another trip to submit election-related documents. Lee's campaign office director Tam Yu Chung says that's to replenish missing documents. So far, Lee has submitted more than 780 nominations, far exceeding the threshold of 188 needed to run in the race. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
Police are on the hunt for a man involved in an armed robbery at a bank in Mong Kok this afternoon. The heist happened at a branch of China Construction Bank on Nathan Road. The bank reported that a man brandished a gun-like object and made off with some $14,000 in cash. The suspect was wearing a blue and black windbreaker with a black cap at the time. Fleeing the scene, he boarded the 8070 bus bound for Ma On Shan. Police continued their search along the bus route. Still ahead on tonight's news, the United States agrees to send $800 million of military aid to war-torn Ukraine. Suspect in New York subway shooting is arrested. And the M+ Museum will reopen next Thursday.
Welcome back to TVB News. Ukrainian forces say they struck and seriously damaged the flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet. It's a potentially major setback to Moscow's forces as they try to regroup for a renewed offensive in eastern Ukraine.
The reported strike came a day after Washington approved $800 million in new military assistance to Kyiv. The Defense Ministry only said a fire on board the vessel caused ammunition to blow up, forcing the crew of hundreds to evacuate. It did not say what caused the fire. But an Odessa region governor said the Ukrainians struck the cruiser with 2 missiles and caused serious damage. The attack would be another blow to Russia after Ukraine said it destroyed a landing support ship in the Sea of Azov late last month. Moscow has not commented on what happened to that ship. Russia's naval activities are crucial to supporting land operations in the south of Ukraine. A day earlier, after a call with Ukraine's leader, U.S. President Joe Biden approved $800 million in new military assistance to Ukraine. The Pentagon says the package expands the scope of the systems provided ahead of a Russian military pivot to the east.
Tailored to meet urgent Ukrainian needs for today's fight as Russian forces shift the focus of their ruthless aggression now to eastern Ukraine.
Analysts say the latest package is more lethal than previous assistance.
In policy and recognizing the tools that are needed, and for once, I mean, there was even armored personnel carriers listed on that. There were helicopters listed on that. That's different for sure.
Residents of the northern city of Chernihiv are returning to what's left of their homes after shelling and airstrikes by Russian forces left the city in ruins 2 weeks ago. The mayor says 70% of Chernihiv is gone. The mayor of Mariupol says Russia has destroyed 90% of his city and left 21,000 people dead, branding the attacks as war crimes. Russia has denied targeting civilians and blames Ukraine for civilian deaths. The UN Secretary General is casting doubt on whether a peace agreement in Ukraine can be reached soon.
Meanwhile, the presidents of Poland, Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia visited Kyiv for talks with their Ukrainian counterpart, Volodymyr Zelensky. Daniel Rao tells us more.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said there is currently no chance of a humanitarian ceasefire being brokered in Ukraine. Still, he said the UN has made a number of proposals to Russia aiming to seek a peaceful resolution to the conflict.
Martin Griffith went to Moscow and Kyiv. I don't think we have the chance to have a humanitarian ceasefire as we wanted globally. But there is a number of proposals that were made, and we are waiting for an answer from the Russian Federation in relation to those proposals, including different mechanisms for local ceasefires, for corridors, for humanitarian assistance, evacuations, and different other aspects that can minimize the dramatic impact on civilians that we are witnessing.
Meanwhile, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said the U.S. will further assess whether to launch its own formal review of whether Russia has committed genocide during its invasion of Ukraine. This comes after U.S. President Joe Biden stated for the first time earlier this week that Moscow's assault amounted to genocide. State Department spokesperson Ned Price did not outline whether the president's remarks reflected the overall stance of the U.S. government.
The president also has emphasized that it will be the task of international lawyers to determine whether what we're seeing meets that legal threshold of genocide. The president was basing his comments on the horrific atrocities that we've all seen in Mariupol, in Bucha, and Kharkiv.
The presidents of Poland, Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia visited the Ukrainian capital Kyiv on Wednesday. There they held talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The four leaders reaffirmed their commitments to support Ukraine with military aid and politically. They observed heavily damaged buildings and called for the Kremlin to be held accountable for what they said were war crimes carried out by Russian soldiers in Ukraine. The head of the World Health Organization also called on Russia to return to peace talks. He urged the international community to not ignore crises that are unfolding in other countries.
For the sake of humanity, I urge Russia to come back to the table and to work for peace. In the meantime, humanitarian corridors must be established so that medical supplies, food and water can be delivered and civilians can move to safety. The whole attention to Ukraine is very important, of course, because it impacts the whole world. But even a fraction of it is not being given to Tigray, Yemen, Afghanistan, Syria, and the rest. A fraction.
Daniel Rao, TVB News.
The suspect of the New York subway shooting rampage that injured more than 20 people is now under arrest.
Frank James reportedly called the police tip line himself, now faces federal charges. More from NBC News.
Tonight, a collective sigh of relief in New York City.
Frank, why'd you shoot all those people?
62-year-old Frank R. James is in custody, charged with a federal crime after the bloody attack in a Brooklyn subway station during rush hour. Governor Kathy Hochul announcing the news.
The suspect has been arrested.
The arrest comes after a 28-hour manhunt. Police releasing several images of the suspect and appealing to the public for help. In a bizarre twist, law enforcement officials say it was James himself who called the Crime Stoppers tip line, saying he heard police were looking for him and he was at a McDonald's in Manhattan's East Village. He said his phone was dying, so they should come quickly. Officers rushed there, but he was already gone. They found James nearby, and he was taken into custody without incident around 1:30.
We were able to shrink his world quickly. There was nowhere left for him to run.
This video from early Tuesday morning shows James entering the subway in Brooklyn, struggling to get through the turnstile before going through an emergency exit. 2 hours later, investigators say he opened fire on the crowded train. 10 people were shot, 29 total injured, including kids heading to school. One victim just 12 years old. Police say James then used the subway to flee, getting on a train across the platform, riding one stop, shoulder to shoulder with some of his victims. He later entered a station in another Brooklyn neighborhood. Law enforcement now piecing together his past.
He is known to us and has ties in Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York City.
James was born in New York and has 9 arrests here dating back to 1992. Charges including criminal sex acts and possession of burglary tools. Police say he purchased the Glock 9mm handgun used in the attack at an Ohio pawn shop in 2011. There are dozens of posts from James on social media, many filled with profanity-laced rants about race, violence, and even mocking New York Mayor Eric Adams for trying to make the subway safer.
And I'm on my way to Philadelphia.
In this video, James talks about traveling from Milwaukee to Philadelphia, where police say he rented the U-Haul van found a few miles from the scene of the attack. Investigators still haven't determined a motive or why the suspect attacked the 36th Street stop. Tonight, that station is once again filled with commuters.
The city runs on the subway.
And you feel perfectly safe?
Yeah.
In a landmark ruling, the top court in New Zealand has granted China's extradition request for a murder suspect. That's to extradite Kim Yup Kim, a South Korean with permanent residency in New Zealand, to face trial in China. The 46-year-old was accused of killing a 20-year-old woman in Shanghai back in 2009. New Zealand's Supreme Court ruled in favor of the extradition request on grounds of sufficient assurances from China that Kim will receive a fair trial and won't be tortured. Kim's lawyers expressed disappointment at the ruling. China and New Zealand have no extradition agreements to this date. Back in Hong Kong, the government says it will consult the public this year on the legislation of crowdfunding regulations. Among the subjects up for discussion are the operations of local crowdfunding platforms, the need for licenses, and whether crowdfunding activities should be permitted. In a blog post, the Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury, Christopher Hoy, said crowdfunding activities such as peer-to-peer lending and donations are only partially regulated. He added it is difficult to regulate popular crowdfunding activities online and that the SAR government lacks control over the use of their funds. Initial ideas include the introduction of licenses and investigations on crowdfunded projects.
After a long closure amid the pandemic situation in Hong Kong, M+ Museum in West Kowloon will reopen next Thursday, ready to bring a new art experience to visitors. Sculptures made by American artist Isamu Noguchi will be exhibited in the roof garden of M+ Museum. The sculptor encouraged visitors to interact with the exhibits, such as sitting down on the bench and climbing the slope. There's also a thematic exhibition featuring Nalini Milani's artworks between 2007 and 2019. The exhibits are presented in moving image format. The new restaurant at the museum possesses art elements as well.
In a setting that is absolutely internationally the best. There is no other restaurant that has the view that we have. It is absolutely an exceptional experience. And as I think we were showing when you came to visit, there's no bad seat in the house because of the reflectiveness. So you actually become part of the landscape.
And that's the news. Thanks for watching.
Good night.